Welcome back to The Explainer. I am so glad you're joining me today because we are digging into a truly fascinating and honestly pretty sobering medical mystery. Just imagine this for a second. You're on this amazing luxury expedition, right? You're sailing through literally the most remote, pristine, and freezing corners of the globe. You're completely cut off from civilization. And then, an invisible, deadly threat just silently starts spreading among the passengers. Well, this isn't a movie plot. This is the exact scenario unfolding right now aboard a stranded polar cruise ship. It's a crazy story of extreme isolation, rapid medical decline, and a massive, urgent international response.
Okay, let's dive into this. The ship at the center of this whole medical emergency is the Dutch-flagged MV Hondius. It's this heavy-duty, ice-breaking expedition vessel that's specifically designed for the ultimate adventure in some of the most rugged waters on Earth. But, well, its journey was abruptly halted. Right now, it's anchored and quarantined off the coast of Cape Verde in the Atlantic Ocean. Out of nowhere, this severe, completely unknown illness just struck this isolated expedition, forcing the ship to drop anchor and literally call the globe for help.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of this, you gotta consider the environment here. We are talking about nearly 150 people packed into this highly contained ship. That includes 88 passengers and around 61 crew members, making up 23 different nationalities. We've got Americans, Brits, Spanish, German, Dutch citizens, the whole shebang. These folks were completely isolated from the rest of the world, just navigating the vast ocean. And you know, when you have 150 people confined together that many miles from any mainland hospital, yeah, any sudden medical emergency becomes incredibly difficult to manage.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds, because geography played a massive role in how this crisis unfolded. The Hondius departed southern Argentina on April 1st for what was supposed to be a weeks-long Atlantic odyssey, heading down to Antarctica and the remote South Atlantic. But by April 11th, tragedy struck when the very first passenger died. Because of their incredibly remote location, they couldn't even get that first victim off the ship until April 24th at St. Helena. That was followed by another evacuation days later at Ascension Island. The sheer geographic isolation just severely compounded the crisis, way before the World Health Organization was even alerted in early May.
So, what exactly were the ship's doctors actually dealing with here? Well, the initial symptoms seemed, almost like a really severe stomach bug or the flu. A 70-year-old Dutch man was the first to fall ill. He presented with a fever, a bad headache, severe abdominal pain, and diarrhea. But then, and this is where it gets scary, it rapidly turned into a terrifying respiratory decline. His sudden death on board marked the genuinely terrifying start of this outbreak, totally baffling the ship's medical staff, who basically had no idea what pathogen they were even facing out there in the middle of the ocean.
The severe toll of this mysterious illness quickly became pretty apparent as the vessel desperately navigated from island to island just searching for medical help. Tragically, 3 people lost their lives. That 70-year-old Dutch man, his 69-year-old wife, and a German national. On top of that, another British passenger was left fighting for his life in critical condition in a South African ICU. Meanwhile, a Swiss man who had already returned home, plus 2 crew members still on board, all required urgent medical treatment.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the breakthrough that finally came from South African laboratories. Through advanced PCR testing, which basically looks for the specific genetic material of a bug, they confirmed the culprit. It was Hantavirus. And guys, this is an absolutely shocking discovery. Hantavirus is a rare family of viruses that usually spreads strictly through contact with the urine, saliva, or feces of infected rodents, like mice or rats. Finding a rodent-borne virus causing a deadly cluster on a luxury, ice-breaking ship floating in the Atlantic, that is a massive, massive epidemiological puzzle.
To understand exactly why these passengers deteriorated so fast, we have to look at the progression of what's called Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, or HPS. After the initial incubation period, patients get hit with intense fatigue, muscle aches, and those awful gastrointestinal issues we mentioned earlier. But then, about 4 to 10 days later, the really terrifying late-stage symptoms emerge. Patients start coughing and getting severe shortness of breath as fluid just rapidly builds up in their lungs. It essentially causes acute respiratory distress, and it carries an absolutely brutal 38% fatality rate. 38%!
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the outbreak shifted from just a localized tragedy to a full-blown global health concern. See, laboratory tests revealed they weren't just dealing with any old hantavirus, they specifically found the Hondius strain. Standard hantavirus, it basically only jumps from rodents to humans.
But the Andes strain, which by the way is endemic to South America where the cruise actually began, is literally the only known variant capable of rare human-to-human transmission. This one vital distinction changes absolutely everything about how global health authorities have to respond.
Maria van Kerkhove, the WHO Director for Epidemic and Pandemic Preparedness, outlined the exact danger here. Because the Andes strain allows for human-to-human transmission in rare cases, the first victim likely transmitted the virus directly to his wife, who, as we know, also tragically died. When you factor in the tightly enclosed environment of a ship, sharing cabins and dining areas over several weeks, the potential for the virus to pass among very close contacts becomes a very real, very pressing threat.
Which brings us to the massive, multinational, logistical puzzle required to handle a crisis like this. I mean, you can't exactly just call an ambulance in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, right? The ship had to disembark the first patients at St. Helena, then sail 800 miles north to Ascension Island just to evacuate the British patient. South Africa stepped up to provide crucial ICU care in Santon, along with that breakthrough lab testing. Meanwhile, another infected passenger made it all the way back to Switzerland before even testing positive. And right now, the ship is seeking permission to reach its final destination in Spain's Canary Islands.
As you can probably guess, all this international movement created a major contact tracing challenge. In South Africa alone, authorities had to urgently track down 62 individuals. Why? Well, this happened because the 69-year-old infected Dutch woman managed to travel to Johannesburg's OR Tambo International Airport, which is the busiest airport in Africa, by the way, where she collapsed while trying to catch a connecting flight home. Authorities basically had to scramble to track down everyone on her flight and in the terminal who might have been exposed to the virus.
But despite the dramatic collapse at the airport, health authorities were super quick to calm the waters. The South African Department of Health, alongside Health Minister Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, really emphasized that because human-to-human transmission of the Andes strain requires very close, prolonged contact, like we're talking sharing a bed or sharing food, the general public is not at risk. The tracing and monitoring of those 62 individuals is highly controlled, and they've assured everyone that the situation is being managed with incredible precision, so no need to panic.
So where does that actually leave the rest of the passengers? Well, right now, the MV Hondius is just waiting off the coast of West Africa. Following joint protocols from the World Health Organization and the European Union, the remaining passengers are strictly isolating in their cabins. They are basically just waiting for the final green light to make a 3-day journey to the Canary Islands. Once they get there, specialized European response units are already set up to safely screen, treat, and ultimately repatriate everyone on board safely.
So the crucial point is this. As emphasized by Dr. Hans Kluge from the WHO, while this has obviously been a devastating event for those on the Hondius and their families, the global risk remains really low. The unique nature of the Andes strain means it's not going to just sweep through the public like a flu or a cold. The medical mystery has been solved, the real culprit has been identified, and concrete safety protocols are firmly in place to bring this whole crisis to a close without any wider danger.
But it does leave us with this final, truly provocative thought. We are constantly pushing the boundaries of exotic tourism, right? We're sending these luxury ships into the most remote, untouched, and ecologically sensitive corners of our planet. As human interaction with these hidden environments increases, how must our international health networks adapt? How do we ensure we can catch rare, deadly viral anomalies, like a literal rodent-borne virus on a polar cruise, before they travel from an isolated island to the busiest airports in the world? It is a fascinating question about the future of travel and epidemiology. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.